Welcome. I'm Victoria Rosa. As you know, you can find me at openandawesome.com. And as you probably also know, I work with people who are in open relationships or polyamory, and I help them establish all the connection and fun they want while maintaining really happy, healthy relationships. And as part of what I do, I like to interview different people in the field. And today I have with me Patricia Johnson and Mark Michaels, and they're the authors of a new book called, and I'm going to read the title word for word, as one should, because I think it's amazing. It's called Designer Relationships, A Guide to Happy Monogamy, Positive Polyamory, and Optimistic Open Relationships. So welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. You know, Patricia wrote me an email, said, we have this book coming out, and I was really struck by bringing together all those types of relationships, because most books tend to focus just on polyamory or, you know, polyamory and open relationships, but, you know, monogamy tends to be out of it. And, you know, then you have other books that are all about monogamy and they don't even have it on the title, which makes it a bit hard to know what kind of book we're talking about. So I was really excited by this. And, you know, as I read the book, I was even more excited, and I just wanted to share it with everyone. So let me just tell you a bit about Patricia and Mark. So they're the co-authors of this new book called Designing Relationships, and they'll tell us a bit more about what designer relationships is. And they're also a devoted married couple, and they've been working together since 1999 and have written a whole series of books that are classics by this stage. So some of them are Partners in Passion, Great Sex Made Simple, Tantra for Empowerment, and the Essence of Tantric Sexuality. So really good.
Classic, I'll take that.
Yeah. Good. So, you know, I have some questions for them, but it's really important to me that you also get to ask your own questions. So some people have already been sending them through, they're posting them on the event page or sending them through by email. So we'll be giving priority to those, but also to any coming in. So as we go along, just feel free to just use the Q&A box in the Google Hangouts events page, or the Google Plus event page, which you'll have got in your sign up email. If you're watching this through YouTube, you can send us your questions through Twitter. Okay, so just tweet at Victoria Rosa OA. So Victoria Rosa, that's O and A for Open and Awesome. Okay, and I will be getting those and answering them. So good. Great, so ready to get started?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. So first of all, the title of the book is Designer Relationships. So can you tell us a bit what you mean by that? Because I know it's a specific term.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the term was kind of gifted to us by Ken Haslam, who's one of the kind of elders in the poly community going back to the early 90s. He's the founder of the Kinsey Institute's Polyamory Archive. And he had always wanted to write a book called Designer Relationships, and gave us his blessing to do it instead. The basic idea is that he felt that polyamory was sort of an insufficient word, and one that was
polarizing, I would say.
Yeah, he would. So, I think you can say polarizing.
And yeah, you know, the factions were like, you know, are you a swinger? Then you don't, you know, obviously have no emotional connection, because I do with all my partners, and I'm obviously not indiscriminate with my lovers, and or, you know, approach sexuality as a party attitude or something.
So Ken actually came up, before Designer Relationships, he came up with the term swally, which for people who kind of like to have casual encounters but also have, you know, multiple loving relationships. And then he moved on to Designer Relationships, and really the key concept is that you design it in your own way so that it works for you, instead of trying to squeeze it into any preordained or predetermined box.
We recently came up with a term that kind of encapsulates the entire title into one idea, and that's just happyogamy.
I like that.
Just be happy, and who cares what anybody else says, or ignore everybody else's rules and make your own rules and stick with happy.
So the designer in this designer relationship is you and your partner or partners, and you design it to suit your needs, and you redesign it, you know, when you need to as well.
Right, because there are plenty of people who identify as being polyamorous, but through circumstances and things, there are periods of time in which the relationship may end up looking very monogamous at times. But you know, and so this idea that relationships are dynamic, they're changing, humans are changing, your partners are changing, and that, you know, you don't pigeonhole yourself. That's what.
No, and I really like that, especially the idea that you design, and it's not like you designed it and then that is set in stone and you just have to stick by that forever, but that you can just change it as your needs change. You know, I had some of my really good friends were, well, they were monogamous and then they were poly for a while. And then because they knew that, they tended to get really caught up in NRE when they had their first child. They said the first year of, well, like half of the pregnancy and the first year of the child, we're going to be monogamous because we feel like we should be focusing on like bringing this child into the world. So
yeah, and that works for some people, and other people, they want multiple parent type situations, which is also another, you know, option. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what works for each person will be different. And that doesn't mean that if you get pregnant, you need to dump all your other partners.
No.
Please don't do that. So, you know, and one of the reasons that I really like this is because I've got really tired of people coming to polyamory because they feel that the alternative is just doing monogamy the way that it's done in the general culture or in their like specific subculture. So it's just like, I don't want to do what, you know, everything that those people over there are doing. So poly allows me to design my relationship. So, you know, I was curious to hear from you in terms of would a monogamous designer relationship look like?
I'm glad you brought that up. What we're distinguishing that from is the traditional monogamy mandate or
default. The cultural monogamy is a cultural default, and you know we're based in the U.S. and we're talking about this from a very U.S. American perspective. But I think it's true in most of the Western world, even now, you know, or maybe even more so now, that the expectation is that and the influence of Disney is huge on all of this, you know, that kind of happily ever after model, etc. So you do monogamy and anything else is suspect or pathological, and you do monogamy without really defining it for yourselves.
This is something we like to ask in our lectures, and we'll say, what can anybody define monogamy? And invariably someone's hand will come up and they'll just very firmly say, one person with one person. And we're like, okay, well, let's break that down. You know, is that only sexuality? Are you talking about, can you fantasize about someone else? Can you even masturbate? What if you flirted? Is that what? And then suddenly it starts to, like, I hope that people really realize that people speak about it as if it's monolithic and that we're all talking about the exact same thing. But once you start asking these very specific questions, no two people think of it as the same thing, or it's very abstract.
And if you look at it historically, you know, there was a definition of monogamy 60 years ago, which was basically you're expected to be a virgin at marriage, you're expected to be faithful during marriage, and you know, and you're only out as if your partner dies, and then you marry somebody else.
Or you may not be able to, right?
I mean, yes, you know, wealthy men were expected to have mistresses, and it wasn't talked about. But that was the predominant cultural model, was this, you know, one man, one woman till death do us part, as the anti-marriage equality people say.
So when we the distinguish between a traditional monogamy mandated relationship and a designer monogamous relationship is that the designer couple is open to having discussions and examining virtually every other type of relationship style, and really thinking, you know, would this work for us? Are we, you know, it can't, the very fact that they can have a conversation and examine all of this, and then they still choose monogamy, then they really know that this is right for us. So
yeah, so it's just looking at all the other relationship options and just maybe saying, I want to take this, I don't know, like the high quality discussions I want to take from polyamory, and the, I don't know, like having sex in front of other people, I want to take that from the swingers community. And I don't, you know, kind of like cherry pick what you want, but still be within the confines of monogamy.
Yeah, and you know, there are a lot of people who do that. It's, in the swinging world, it's not that uncommon for people who to go to swing parties but never interact with anybody but their
they dance, they meet and they talk, they wear sexy clothing, and the whole reason they're there is to go back up to that hotel room and just unleash on one another. So they're having a great time, and that's how they you know, keep the spark going. But I think that there is a fear among people to even bring up the topic, that if you so much as speak to your partner, you know, I'm curious, what do you think about polyamory? That for some reason that's out in the open, you will never be forgiven for even bringing it up. Your partner will always hang that over your head. Well, you never thought I was enough for you, or it becomes this. So there's so many people out there that don't even dare breathe a word about any alternative sexual expression or anything that might enhance their erotic life together.
And society is so mononormative that, you know, I mean, we've talked to people who've gone into therapy and just talked about the possibility of opening their relationship, and the therapist, you know, is shaming, is telling them that they're playing with fire, that their relationship may be in trouble. There's still this prevalent assumption about open relationships that they're somehow unhealthy, somehow inferior. It's very sad. I think people are limited because they don't know where to get advice. It's getting better, but that's still the dominant model.
And yeah, no, and I've heard of people who tell their therapist, and the therapist are just like, okay, so let's talk about the relationship between your parents, you know, and they don't even like say that they have prejudice, which makes it very hard to push back on that.
Yeah. Right. I'm curious as to your thoughts on this. And I lost my thought. I'm sorry. Well, share a thought.
No, I was a bit curious in what you were saying a minute ago, Patricia, about like some people are really scared to even bring it up with their partner. And so what's your advice around that? How?
Well, we advise people to have frequent, if you're not talking about your sexual life together with your partner and haven't figured out how to have conversations among you or between you about your sex life and about your relationship and about how much you love certain specific things, so you know where you're really solid and where you really function well, then you don't jump from having no conversation to suddenly dumping this kind of topic on your partner. I mean, that doesn't, you don't have a foundation. You need that foundation of goodwill and trust and mutuality in learning how to have conversations like that. And once you know how to create that, then it's unbelievable how creative you can become.
So yeah, I think it really begins with having the conversations about sexuality, having the conversations about what your understandings of monogamy are. Because I mean, I think the Ashley Madison scandal is a illustration of how confused people are about that. Because for some people, oh, I just signed up for a website. You know, for other people, it's like, well, it's just the same as if you'd had an affair. And there's, you know,
it's a thought crime. And but simultaneously, there's huge factions of the population that think that the only real sex is penetrative intercourse. Some only among opposite sex. I mean, really.
Which is weird, because a lot of cases they're the same people who oppose marriage equality, but they think the people that they're so upset about aren't really having sex. So what's the deal with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a lot of that. And well, I went to the Lisbon non-monogamy conference, and there was a woman presenting there. I think her last name was Wasserman, about cyber infidelity. And there's lots of people who just start chatting online and they give no importance to it, because it's just like, you know, talking to a stranger, and before they know it, it's just like they've had like 10 hours of highly charged sexual conversation with someone, and then their partner feels like they are cheating and they may not feel like they're cheating.
That's why it's important to have these conversations before you start chatting. So, you know, like really, I mean, you know, would that be an issue? Because I really like chatting, and sometimes these conversations will go longer, and I wouldn't feel comfortable if I had to hide that from you and just, are you cool or something? Simple as that.
Yeah. So for me, that kind of comes into breaking down what you're doing in your relationship, and what makes your relationship, you know, monogamous or poly or open or whatever kind of relationship you might be having.
You know, I think that one of the things is, and we talk about this in the book, it's to move away from the idea that any of these styles of relating is monolithic, right? So monogamy, even within sex, we divide monogamy into 4 components. The first one is sexual. And you really need to have a conversation about what sexual monogamy means to you, as we've been talking about. It can mean different things to different people. And if you're in a couple situation, it's really important to define it between yourselves. The next component is social monogamy. Is emotional monogamy. And that really has to do with how pair bonded you are and how willing you are to have emotional connections outside of the relationship. And again, that can vary a great deal. Like, we're very, very pair bonded. Emotionally pair bonded. But we certainly allow ourselves, and, you know, don't have a problem with each other having deep attachments to other people. We may not define it as love, but they can be very, very strong.
Or crushes.
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 But for other people, that might not be okay, you know. The next category is social, and that's really who you hang out with. And that's Chris Ryan's definition of social monogamy, who you hang out with. And sometimes people, like in swinging, sometimes people say, well, people who swing are really emotionally monogamous, and they're not willing to risk attachments to other people. But I think for a lot of people who swing where it's recreational, there's a big social monogamy component as well. They like to be in the same room together having sex. They're really connected in that way.
Yeah, in swing events, there's always that big room where everyone likes to gather together socially.
But so that social component, I think a lot of times is like, yeah, we'd like to do this as an activity we do together. And it's about our social engagements more than it is about the emotional. And then the final category is practical monogamy, and that's domestic arrangements. And, you know, I think even now, most people who identify as polyamorous are in socially monogamous domestic arrangements, I believe. At least in the US, that's the case.
Yeah, I think it varies widely in terms of polyamory, how people manage it. And I really like these categories, because a bit like my thinking was along those lines. And like I was telling you before we started the interview, you know, I come from Spain, and in there is, well, what I would call the social component is also like very family oriented. So who's your official partner? You know, who do you tell the police that is your partner? Who do you take home for like Christmas or the holidays? You know, who do you take to a work event? That kind of thing. Like, who's your socially officially recognized partner. If you're lucky, you may be able to have more than one. But for a lot of people, it's not possible to have more than one openly. If you're poly, and if you're a swinger or in an open relationship, then have a very clear kind of like social representative, let's say. So how do you think, like, because in monogamy you explained it and it seems to be quite clear, but how can people who are in other configurations or wanting to have other configurations kind of like use that framework to design their own relationships?
Yeah, well, I mean, see how you relate to your other lovers and see how that construct is. Is it mostly emotional or is it, sexual? It kind of gives you another framework.
Yeah, because we're all on different points on the spectrum, and maybe, in each of those categories, and maybe at different points on the spectrum at different times in our lives. So it can be a really useful exercise for people who identify as poly and are already in poly configurations to think about that, I think. I think another thing that we encourage for people, regardless of structure, is to create a statement of purpose for the relationship. So instead of focusing on agreements and contracts, which are important in some realms and necessary at times, this is really more of a vision statement. And so we think of relationships as collaborative processes. And the more that you can create a vision statement or a statement of purpose that expresses what you love about the relationship, what your desires are for, how you would like to create it in the future. If
you have any fears or concerns, and then how you're going to know if you're, in alignment with your vision and your purpose, and, how are you going to check in with one another as you continue. And this is an ongoing conversation. You revisit it time and time again. It's not something you draft and write and then done.
Yeah. So it's something that you state, and I like this, like focusing on kind of the positive aspects, even though you also talk about fears and things, but it's like, what do you want actually, rather than what things you're not going to do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, my background is law. I was trained as a lawyer, though I've never really done very conventional legal work. And you talk about, contracts and agreements and stuff, and they're usually written in anticipation of a breach. And they're about,
what are we going to do when you break the rules?
And assigning rights and obligations rather than what are we going to do together. Mm-hmm. So it matters a lot to me to try encourage people to reframe that, because I think the adversarial legal models, not really productive in relationships.
Or building trust and all of that. So, keeping that collaborative, co-creative approach alive, so that it's always that dynamic thing rather than, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I know some people who are quite rebellious, and as soon as they set rules, even though they might agree with them, they might agree with the spirit as well as the letter, but they know that it's going to take 6 months or it's going to take 3 years, but this is where I'm going to go, the thing that we're not going to do.
Right. And we recently had a conversation about this very thing. And I think that, especially if it's a rule that feels like it's more of a controlling kind of aspect of the partner, I think invariably that partner, even subconsciously, might feel disempowered by having that rule. And, it might be an act of empowering yourself. Boy, I'm not advocating breaking rules, but I hope that makes sense, that it's an act of regaining your power.
I think the thing about rules is that for people who are starting out in any kind of alternative relationship style, when you're at the beginning, I think rules are really important because, and maybe not for everybody, but in general, because you're in new territory and you are engaging in behaviors that involve emotional risks that conventional people don't experience. And if you really value the relationship that you're in and you want to build trust, having rules and sticking to them at first is great. Once you've established the trust and you've had some experience, then you can become more flexible.
So maybe ground rules, or, you know, little sort of criteria as to how we're going to approach this might be a better way. But it is how you build trust, and that's just so key, is by establishing something, make a game plan. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and you experience it and you come out of it and everybody was on the same page.
And
even
to draw from our own relationship, I mean, we were open from the start, but we'd been together for maybe 6 months or maybe even a little less than that. And I was doing a massage workshop at Harbin, and I told Patricia about just sort of running sexual energy with someone.
This is interesting. That's one of our first conversations about what sex is, because for me, that's sex. That's just sexual. I mean, because for me, I do running energy, I would be having orgasms. And
can you explain about what this running sexual energy is for those who might not be familiar?
Oh, right.
Well, it comes out of the whole Tantra, our background in Tantra, and it really, it's hard to describe. It's easier to demonstrate. But it's really becoming aware of sex as a phenomenon that occurs not just in the genitals, but throughout the whole body and even beyond the body. And so you're connecting with someone, and through breathing techniques and visualization and conscious touch, you're building up this kind of incredible erotic charge.
Yeah, and once, I mean, for the listeners and viewers, I mean, it's just knowing that that's possible sometimes is enough to unlock the experience. Just taking that leap of faith, though. I've never experienced that, but these guys do. I'm gonna just try and just believe that that's a real thing, and sometimes that is like enough to awaken that experience.
So I was engaging in this energetic way, not having genital intercourse, but having a lot of body contact and a lot of erotic buildup. And I called Patricia, and I could tell from her voice that she was really not okay with this.
But I was like, I love him. I love him. I do not want to try to own his sexuality, his evolution, his growth, his learning. I am not that person. No way. I'm not gonna do. He's like, you're not okay with it. It's okay with me. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm okay. That's who I am, you know? And he's like, no, really, it's okay. I won't run any more energy. And I'm like, ugh. So it was one of those, like, it was an important conversation.
And so, you know, at that point in our relationship, it was necessary for us to be basically sexually and emotionally exclusive. And we were for a while.
It lasted for a little while. But yeah,
only like 3 or 4 months.
But you know, as we then started, you know, having more of these conversations and gradually sort of experimenting and stuff, then it became clear that this is exactly the kind of lifelong relationship I was looking for, because my whole life I was like, marriage, I know that's not for me. And everything I saw portrayed, especially like in popular media and in sitcoms, are the worst, where you just see people bickering and belittling one another to laugh tracks. I was just like, I have no interest. I'd rather just be by myself and have lovers. And like, really, you too? And I'm like, oh, you're hot. So,
well, I had been married before, and you know, kind of tried to be monogamous, and it really didn't work out very well. You know, because for me anyway, that involves kind of squelching my sexuality, and it just ended badly. And it took me a while to figure out that it wasn't for me, and also kind of how to do something different.
Right.
Yeah, I think lots of people can relate to that. Yeah, it seems like there's not very many who just started out open. I did, but not very many did. Yeah. So one thing that, as I was reading the book, I was going like, yes, is when you were talking about STIs, which I think like tend to be talked about extensively in like all the poly and open literature. And I always got like this weird feeling of like, oh my God, there's all this, like there's this risk and this danger to it. So when you just worded it as like STIs in our culture is seen as punishment, that really resonated with me, because I see like lots of people do think it's like, you know, it's I've sinned, therefore I have got this STI. And in, well, my circle, I've seen how some people, I think like that framing of STIs has led to a lot of drama. So I had a friend who just referred to one of the, well, I hope his only incident as chlamydia gate.
Yeah, I think there's a movement still cutting edge where people literally post their test status, or they're upfront about it. Or if you're at a play party, you sit in the circle and everyone discloses what their STI status is and what they're interested in doing that evening.
And what their safer sex protocols are. And all that.
And so once you have those conversations out of the way, then, you know, or, you know, that established, I don't want to say out of the way, but established, wow, the freedom and the fun that environment can hold is really amazing.
But I think it's very, very hard for any of us to get past this idea that there's punishment attached to STIs. I mean, it's so prevalent in the culture. It's so deeply embedded. I think the important thing is to try to combat it, to try and you know, recognize that those feelings are going to come up, and to think it's something that happens. It's a risk that we take when we're sexually open, but it's not a punishment for what you do. I mean, you know, getting into a car accident isn't a punishment for driving, and we actually have, you know, much more risk of getting killed in a car accident than we do of catching an STI.
Yeah, and I mean, what I say is like flu is.
Well, maybe that's not quite accurate. I'm sorry.
Like I say, flu is an STI because you do get flu from having sex with someone.
Right.
You know, you get it from other ways as well, but if you get flu because you were having sex with someone with flu, nobody just goes like, "Oh my God." You know?
Right. That's a great point.
But you also go to, you know, you try not to expose your partners to flu as well. So, you know, it's, I mean, the same thing. Being responsible is trying to minimize the risk. Yeah,
or just assuming that, you know, you have flu and I really want to have sex with you, so therefore I know that I'm probably going to get flu.
Right.
I'm going to do it anyway. You know, that's a choice that you can make. I think the same goes for other STIs. What I notice is that everyone tends to share their results when they're negative, but very few people talk about actually having an STI. It doesn't feel very safe to discuss it, and even having a history of having STIs seems to be quite a bad thing. So
yeah, I think it's a process, and just becoming more open and talking about it is the way to go. And I do want to add that for people who may be new to the subject, that the research that's out there really indicates that people who are doing any form of consensual non-monogamy are more careful about safer sex practices than the general public. And so I think regardless of community, there's an awareness and a sense of taking reasonable precautions that the general public is pretty far behind the open relationship community.
So yeah, ostensibly monogamous people will not use protection at a higher rate, not disclose any STI status at a higher rate, and use alcohol and drugs. This is not a great combination. And yeah, and so in this, the cheating culture that monogamy instills, that cheating and affairs,
the
really,
default monogamy.
Default. Oh, I don't want to trash monogamy. Default monogamy instills, really supports this kind of behavior. It really encourages people, because if you buy the condom, you have to admit to yourself that you are having sex with someone that other than what you've said. And I think that alone, that act, people can admit that they want to have sex with someone else, so they don't even buy the condom, and moreover have to get a little drunk to lose their inhibitions. And
We've
So,
also heard anecdotally that, you know, sort of the online dating for people in their 40s and over anyway, that having safer sex conversations among people who meet online is kind of shockingly uncommon. Now, I don't know that there's any research on that, but we've heard this from a number of people, and that they don't have real conversations about their STI status frequently enough, and probably don't take the same precautions that a lot in the poly community do.
So, I mean, that's what I finally remembered why open relationships or alternative relationships are so stigmatized, I think, is because there's so much pain around default monogamy, and that how it encourages that cheating and encourages the affairs and encourages risky behavior. That pain is so vivid in there that some people can't even hear people having multiple partners without associating it immediately with those betrayals. And they think they're one and the same, and it's really, boy, monumental to get talking points to really get that. And I'm sure you know this.
Yeah, I mean, I've come across, well, even like personally, people who have this such a strong emotional reaction to it, and often it's because either their parents cheated or one of their parents cheated and they were affected as a child, so they're carrying all this pain associated with, you know, their parents seeing multiple people and the betrayal around that, or they were cheated on quite painfully, often quite early in their relationship history. So then it's just they're reacting to, you know, that's kind of what gets triggered in them. That's
Right.
what.
Yeah, to the point where they can't see someone else have an open relationship, can't be in the same room with them, or, you know, and they don't want to hear a conversation about it even. It's like so taboo. I can understand. Those are horrible, painful experiences.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, need to be processed. So I just want to remind everyone listening that we will be taking questions soon. So if you want your question answered, I would suggest now is a good time to just start typing it in. And I have, well, one more question and a couple of questions people have sent ahead. So we've talked a lot about monogamy and monogamous designer relationships, but how can people who are already in a open or poly relationship or are very clear that that's what they want, how can they apply this approach?
Well, I think, you know, as I kind of mentioned before, the statement of purpose is really important for anyone. The conversations about where you fit on the various monogamy spectrums are really good to have, regardless of what the structure of your relationship is. I think bringing in some of our ideas about really finding ways to connect non-verbally, to think about the relationship as a collaborative process, to be kind to one another.
Kind, and to really think through when you're being honest, really think through what your intentions and motivations are prior to speaking. So that.
And choose the appropriate time whenever possible. You know, it's blurting, and we sometimes talk about promiscuous honesty.
Promiscuous honesty, I like that. Okay, what does that mean?
It means just saying what you feel at any given moment and not thinking about its impacts on others.
Yeah, without any filters or self-reflection. I mean, I felt it, I have to say it. I mean, that this idea of total, complete, and we have seen it sometimes, brutal honesty is the path to connecting. When sometimes you're just beating one another up with your, current emotional state, which may change, and you're not looking at how your expression meets between or among you. And that's where you want, what is that meeting point? Not, oh my God, you know.
I think like we've all got this like inner critic in our head, and we can say the most awful things to ourselves, And when we get close to someone, it's like that inner critic just kind of goes like, no, 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 no. And if you just like say whatever, you know, your inner critic is saying, just blurt it out towards the other person, you're being as horrible as you are to yourself, towards the person you love the most.
So true. So true.
Yeah, I really, really like that. I'm going to take that on, the promiscuous honesty. Good. So we've got a question from Sam, who is saying, my wife and I are just in the process of opening our relationship. And I find that the most difficult thing so far is how other people react to what we're doing or talking about doing. My wife's mum is open to what we're talking about, but my parents are quite worried. We know we're very happy together, but also want to form other close relationships. How can I explain this to others like my parents?
I think that it's the whole issue of coming out about being in an alternative relationship is really, really an important one. And the more that people can come out, the better. But having said that, pick who you come out to, because it is stigmatized still. You may not want to come out in your workplace. You may not really have to come out to your parents. If you feel that you must or you want to, I think the thing, and this is really from my own experience, because we've come out to our families really by writing the last 2 books that we've written.
It's probably the most uncommon story you had is coming out to your parents by going, oh, here's our 5th book we wrote. And I just say, by the way, you can put it down anytime. It gets too intense. Wow. No one making you read this. So that's how I did it.
But I came out to all my family by adding them on Facebook. So, hey.
Well, my parents are in their 90s and don't use Facebook. We've actually, I mean, in past have had dinner with partners that we're involved with, and they didn't know. But I think that I'm going off on a tangent, but I think the really important thing with coming out to your parents is to recognize that they're likely to feel threatened and not understand it. And to reassure them that you're really happy in your relationship. Because what I'm seeing with my parents now is they don't really care. They're just happy that we're happy.
They just want to see us happy. And yeah, they might need reassurance because they might be worried about your emotional safety. And so just really tapping into reassuring your parents' emotional understanding and being compassionate about where they are. I do recommend that you keep on working at it, because I think if you had a parent that was looking at your relationship a little disparagingly or as if it was broken, I think that current, while you could tolerate it, could possibly be eroding, to your partnership. So, keep gently, trying to educate, I think is important. Don't you? Oh my God.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry.
Look how happy they are.
I was supposed to respond to that. I thought it was perfect as it was.
He was like, and I thought, oh gosh, did I just not make sense?
No, the look between you is just like precious. Oh, that looks so cute.
I can't see her very well. I've just started wearing glasses in the last 2 years, and I'm really not used to it. My vision is deteriorating. So
I have to go like like you were with the computer.
Okay, good. We have another question from Stephen. And Stephen, I've briefly rephrased this, so I hope it's keeping to the spirit of what you were trying to ask. But basically it goes, how do I approach people that I'm interested in about being polyamorous? And he shared that he tends to meet most of these people in bars and clubs. So
don't go to the bars and clubs. And don't introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm polyamorous.
Yeah.
They might think it's your name for one thing, but secondly, I think the way for people to start exploring any of these kinds of approaches is to go to events that are specifically geared toward that community.
Right.
And most cities have meetups or you know, groups of some kind that meet. And so go and just start talking to people.
So not with the idea of like, oh, I'm going to be in a polyamorous relationship now. I mean, go because you want to be among people who are successful at this and have a community. This is the best place because, yeah, there's you know, you're in a group of people that have a certain level of education and a certain, you know, curiosity, at least, and desire to be around polyamory. So you're going to have these conversations going to be far more easier.
And I think also don't go looking to hook up or expecting that just because you're going to some kind of poly or swing or any other kind of event that you're guaranteed to get laid or something like that. It's really, especially early on, it's about becoming a part of a community, getting to know people, and not having expectations. And I think for newbies, the way to get involved in the community is just to start coming around and getting to know people.
Or volunteer to help out.
Mm-hmm.
People always love volunteers. And then you have an excuse to go talk to a bunch of people and meet them. So
yeah, and you get to know the organizers, and yeah, that works really well. One thing I was going to say is, like, if you really enjoy clubbing and raves and that kind of thing, a good community to hang out with is the burner community. Because if most likely there's a lot of poly burners. So if you say to a burner, I'm polyamorous, they're quite likely to, first of all, understand, and second, respect that. And
they're great dancers.
They're great dancers, and they're real party people. So if you're a party person, then maybe that's a place to go. And there's probably other communities as well that I'm not aware of, because this does vary geographically. So I think going to your local poly group and talking to people about it is a good thing.
That's certainly what I did, going on 20 years ago now, was I got interested in this, and I was really kind of looking for instruction in Tantra as well, and there was a great deal of overlap. And so I went to Lovingmore, and it was 1997 was the first time I went. And I was just blown away by, it was my first exposure to poly, and I was blown away by, like, here's a group of people that really is thinking about relationships, and made friends at that event, some that I'm still friendly with.
Yeah.
And I've probably met Ken there, actually. So it was a great introduction for me, and I went with no expectations at all, and it was really valuable. So yeah. Get in touch with the community and build friendships first.
Yeah, keep doing that. Yeah, I have to say, I still keep, like, probably some of my core group of friends are from the very first poly meetup I went to. It's an amazing way of doing it. So another thing that really struck me reading your book was around how you were saying not all communication is talking, and sometimes, like, talking can get in the way. So can you explain a bit more about that?
Do you want to?
I was reading the question. I'm sorry. Talking, right? The importance of nonverbal communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
it's huge.
This really does come out of our background in Tantra, especially because Tantra thinks about sexuality as an energetic phenomenon. And I think that we think about relating as a kind of an energetic phenomenon as well. And what happens when you talk a lot of the time is that you're getting into the part of your brain that wants to build an argument, that wants to be right, that wants to convince your partner to see your point. And that's not the way that we connect. I think you said we were talking earlier, it's like you can't reason your way out of an emotional state. But you can do things to shift your emotional state. And that's where the nonverbal stuff really comes in and is really important. And so when we feel conflict brewing between us, we actually take a time out and eye gaze rather than
before we talk. If we have the wherewithal to not get into I'm right phrases and stuff, it still happens occasionally. Shoot, and I want to point out something about nonverbal, that emotions, your emotional state, and how you really understand where your partner is emotionally, I think comes really a large percentage comes through nonverbal communication.
Or precedes verbal communication.
Yeah, and so your ability to really take in, like, you know, the respiratory rate of your partner, if their skin is flushing, to see their facial expressions, are their eyes shifting, you know, things like that, it really gives you so much more information than if you were both to just, if you said, listen, just explain to me what you're feeling. And you just went like, you know, this, and okay, explain it. I don't understand, explain it, you know. That would take forever, but the second you just look and breathe and in silence, you would get so much farther. Now, sometimes you do have to have some words in there. We're not against verbal communication. Just make sure you're connected first.
Because if you do connect first, it can, I mean, we've experienced this. I mean, and sometimes when we know that we have to have a difficult and loaded conversation, we'll actually plan it. And we'll decide that we'll eye gaze first and establish sort of physiological and emotional harmony, and then tackle the difficult subject. It makes it a whole lot easier.
And Mark brings up an important point, just to take this another step, or into maybe to add to this idea, is that difficult conversations really are, why not schedule it? Like, you know, don't wait until your partner's really too tired and can't go, oh, I can't discuss this now. And you're like, okay, we need to talk about money now. You know, like, that's not fair. And your partner, you know, if you schedule it Tuesday at 4 o'clock, we're going to go over our finances, and you both are prepared, you know it's going to happen, start with 5 minutes or 10 minutes of eye gazing. Nobody's blindsided. And it's, you know, that you both care and respect one another and really want to hear what you have to say about the topic. It's just a far better approach.
So what are some ways to connect emotionally and physiologically for those people who don't do Tantra and these kinds of things?
Well, we always encourage people to do the eye gazing practice, and we've learned it in a very specific way that has some reasons behind it.
So how do I gaze?
You stand facing each other.
Please do. Yeah, you can.
And you focus your attention on your right eye, and you look into your partner's left eye, and you just sort of leave the left eye.
So I'm doing the same. So there's this, it's like on an esoteric level, a energetic circuit.
And what happens with that, the reason for the right eye into the left eye, and I know there are some people in the Tantra world that say the right eye is aggressive and you shouldn't do this, but there are some good reasons physiologically for it. Most of us, the left hemisphere is the more verbal, the more logical hemisphere, where we're building that argument I was talking about earlier. And so if we're focusing on our right eye, we're actually giving the left hemisphere a task.
It's like throwing it a bone. The one that really wants to argue and have a real fight, you just throw it a bone and give it something to do so that you can settle into a silent state and find that connection.
And it's a kind of meditation, right? It's like a mantra is the same thing. It's giving your mind, the narrative part of your mind, something to chew on so it will quiet down. The other thing, Patricia was talking about emotional connection. Research shows that most people, overwhelming majority of people, reveal their emotional state more on the left side of the face than on the right. So if you're looking into the left eye, you're picking that up unconsciously, and you're coming into more of a balance.
You both, and you're registering each other, and it has this equalizing effect. So if one of you is in a low mood and the other's kind of, you know, you can just eye gaze for a while and kind of balance one another.
Breathing together consciously is another way to bring that kind of harmony, because then you're syncing up your heart rates and your whole metabolisms. If you can do that in conjunction with the eye gazing, or, you know, holding in a spoon position and just really focusing on breathing in unison.
Yeah, and it's much harder to be mean to someone when you're in sync.
Yes, very true.
Good. I've just seen there's a question coming in from Ireland. Do you think, from your experience, it's possible for open happyogamy to spread into the mainstream without knowledge of Tantra?
Yes, absolutely. The concepts of Tantra can be explained in layman's terms in a way that each individual can relate to. You don't have to use the trappings of the language or the
esoteric stuff. It really, the principles that we're dealing with in designer relationships are really, a lot of them are just based in common sense. It does come through our background in Tantra and the focus on bringing awareness to our lives as fully as we can. But you don't have to buy into any belief system or even really have any knowledge of any specific system to apply those things to your own life.
Yeah, and that's something we really have worked to do in our previous books on Tantra, is to really trim away the trappings so people can get to the content and the core essence of the practices. Great Sex Made Simple is our beginner book. And we don't mention the chakra and the whole thing. No,
we do in that one. We do in that one. But we talk about them as, it doesn't matter if you believe in them or not. They're useful tools for directing your awareness and your imagination. If they don't, you don't have to think that they're a literal thing in the body to use the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's been a while since we read
it. You know, in designer relationships, you seem to, you know, weave in your experience, which is very, you've done a lot of Tantra and, you know, written all these bestsellers in Tantra, so obviously that's going to be in there, but it seems like very agnostic in terms of belief systems. Like everything you're saying seems just applicable across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of ironic because we're really, for quite a while when we're teaching Tantra, we're getting these couples coming in who are ostensibly wanting to learn Tantra, but after a while it became clear they wanted to open their relationships, and that's really why they were there. We weren't advertising ourselves as doing that, but
and that's
it just kind of fell into our lap.
I have to say that's what led us to writing. I mean, one of the motivating factors that led us to writing Designer Relationships was, you know, because once you called, or that word Tantra was around it, it made it safer for them to start exploring. Because I don't know, that just was the key for some people to make it feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to use sometimes.
Good. Oh, sorry. So, you know, when you were talking about communication in the book, you were mentioning around, you know, asking yourself, is it kind? Is it appropriate? Is now the right time? And I know that when I've spoken to people online around like communicate and speak your truth and all this kind of thing, some people do say like, yes. And I had my ex who, because of, you know, they wanted to speak their truth, they would just say the most awful things, a bit like you were mentioning before. So I kind of see like there's not always the self-awareness there when it comes to knowing your intention. So how would you suggest people go about it if they may have an inkling that they may not always be aware?
Well, I think the first thing to do is really very, very intentionally and on an ongoing basis, remind yourself that you're in this relationship because you want to be in it, and that you are going to make every possible effort to interact and to speak as kindly as you can to your partner. And if you keep renewing that in your own mind, it will create a shift in your consciousness and your approach. And then you can begin to notice how your words are received. You know, there are basic things like don't drag up a whole bunch of things when you're having an argument about something specific. Don't just vent. Don't use words like always and never. You know, I mean, kind of the commonplace basic ground rules that are out there. But beyond that, it's about your intention, and it's about really, I know personally, it's like, no matter how heated our interaction may be or how angry I may be at her, I'm always making the effort mentally to think about expressing those feelings in as kind a way as I can.
I think Mark's bringing up something important is that I think when people really strive to be honest, let's say they've never really had that or felt like they could be honest, then suddenly that honesty is like their top goal. And then how it's received gets somehow relegated very low, because you know, I don't blame people if they've never been honest in the past and now they suddenly are learning how to be honest. But I suggest that people just flip that a little bit, so that you really are concerned about how your message is going to be received without compromising the content of your honesty. But this is the priority: how your beloved is going to hear this, and how you're going to, you know, achieve that connection.
You're actually much likelier to get the outcome you desire if you do that, than if you just go, I've got to be honest with you, and then attack.
Right,
you know?
right. And that's usually a phrase you say right before you attack.
To be honest,
to be
frankly.
honest.
You know?
What? I'm just being honest, you know? Oh my gosh. Wow. No, that's not an excuse to really say hurtful things to one another. But we have an acronym, THANKS, THANKS. And this is what, just remember this and ask yourself, is it true? Is it helpful?
Is it the appropriate time?
Is it necessary? Really? Does anybody care if, you know, you express your opinion or say something that you're thinking right at that point?
Is it kind?
Kindness.
And does it improve on the silence? That's you may decide after asking yourselves all those questions that, yes, I really do need to say this. But it's a way of kind of just putting the brakes on a little bit and giving you an opportunity to reflect a little before speaking.
Thanks. Then your partner will say thanks.
So we have another question coming in, and I think this will be the last one because I know we're over time. So it's, I love the idea of designer relationships, but how do you define that to other people? I don't know how to describe who these people in my life are to friends and family. So they end up being called friends, which seems inadequate.
I think that's a highly personal decision.
People, you know, friends with benefits, or my sweetie, or my...
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, lovers, partners, there are any number of different words, and I you know, and there's a lot of controversy too, and people talk about primary, secondary, tertiary partners, and you get all different kinds of structures. So I think our point is that there's no one size fits all.
Have a discussion with your partners and see what they prefer you refer them to them as. You know, because you might come up with some fun, oh, my twiddly boo, you know, and people are like, what's that? Well, actually, it's another word for designer relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's like speaking from Europe, it's just so hard because there are so many languages and so many different terms that I don't like dare suggest, like, sweetie, how do you say sweetie in German? I don't know. Yeah. To convey that. Yeah. Actually, this question is from the US, so but yeah, I think that's a great idea to just ask them how they want to be referred to, and maybe just have a conversation with your friends and family around, this is somebody special to me.
Yeah. That's a nice way of putting it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, it's been absolutely great and a privilege to have you on. And thanks for everyone who's been listening. I don't see any questions right now, which doesn't mean that they're not making their way into the queue. If they are, I will forward them on to Mark and Patricia.
Please do.
Yeah. And our website for folks is michaelsandjohnson.com.
And if they will sign our books and ship them out, if they want a signed copy, obviously they're available through your normal bookstores, online channels,
etc.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And Yes.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fun.
Bye.